Right. Still got a few coming in, but we might as well make a start. There's quite a lot to get on with. So welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm sure there'll be lots of choices of webinars to go to about dashboards now that we're getting a little certainty from the programme. So we're very glad you chose to pick us first. I'm joined today by my colleague David Rich, and we're going to sort of double hand some of the presentation stuff. But the most important thing is that we get to answer your questions. So there's a Q&A feature within Teams, so please use that. And my other colleague, who you might see on camera later, John, will be going through all the questions to make sure that we cover them off for you. So without further ado, David introduce himself when he starts to present, and we'll crack on. So we've split this up rather neatly into sort of the when, what's, how's, and who's of getting ready for dashboards. So let's start off with the when, because that's the most recent news we've had. So 25th of March, DWP published the formal staging profile. So this is the guidance we were waiting on. It was consulted on before. So we now all know when every scheme and every pension provider has to connect to the dashboard infrastructure. As I'd say, started sort of fired the starting pistol again, I would say. We've had a few goes at this, and with the recent programme delay, it's useful to get some certainty out there. One of the things you will notice if you've seen the current staging guidance and compared it to what was suggested previously before we had the year's hiatus, what you might notice is the gap between when the first pensions have to be connected, which is April next year, so just over a year from today, through to the end of October, which is the backstop date in legislation. That's only 18 months to get what could be 60, 70 million pension entitlements up onto the architecture, plus the 30 odd million state pensions that will be there as well. So whilst it's welcome that we've got the confirmation that this is going ahead, there's obviously a lot more compressed timescale this time round than was previously projected. So that will be a theme we will return to a few times. But the other thing we want to think about today is, while we're getting ready for our connection deadlines, which is getting data available, that's not the point necessarily at which the members will start using dashboards. That is called the dashboard availability point. So when it says availability, that means availability to the wider public. And we don't know exactly when that date will be. There's all sorts of predictions as to when it might be. But all we do know is that we will all be given 6 months notice of when that date will be. So at the moment, I don't think it hurts to think about it at the same time as the connection deadline. But that's not to say it will definitely be that date. Some rumours are that it could be earlier than the connection deadline if there are certain criteria met earlier, but it could be later. But that's not within our control. So we don't know when the members will turn up to actually look at the data. What we do know for certain is when you need to make that data available. And that's at some point in that 18 months between the first scheme connect and the connection deadline. A reminder, if you've got any questions, please put them in the Q&A.
Good morning, everyone. I'm David Rich, Head of Data Services at Heywood, and one of the founding members of the PASA Dashboard Working Group. I think summarising from what Chris has just said is that you need to be really clear that October 2026 is not your target date. It's a deadline. And it's highly likely there will be bottlenecks. If you imagine an airport scenario, you wouldn't turn up 10 minutes before your flight. You've got to turn up in time to check your bags in, drop your bottles of water off, get through passport control, get through security, find your way to your boarding gate, and even then you still need to queue up to get on that plane. So there will be bottlenecks. It's not only you that has to connect by October 26. There are thousands of schemes that have to connect And if everyone tries to do it at the last moment at the same time, it's going to become extremely difficult. So do not look at October as the target date. That's an end date, and preparations should ideally start well before then. John, have we had any questions coming up to this point?
No, just the one to get us started, David. Hi everybody. You've mentioned October 26th is not your target date, but the question is, what will happen if you fail to connect in time? I know we're going to go into that more in detail, but is there anything that you can suggest just now that would any pointers there?
Certainly, I can repeat what the regulator has already said, and the FCA have given similar messages to the community that it regulates. But the pensions regulator has said that it reminds everybody that it's a risk-based regulator, so it'll look at the materiality of you missing a date rather than it just being a hard and fast black or white. So that is slightly comforting in a way. But they've also been very clear that they're not going to accept excuses. They're not going to just say, "Oh, I didn't make my staging date, and it turns out because I just didn't start in time." They're going to look at pretty important things as good reasons why you might not have missed your why you might have missed your staging date. And bearing in mind that the staging dates are set out in guidance rather than the legislation. That was partly to keep the legislation simpler in that there was one absolute backstop date of October 2026 where everyone must have connected by. But your dating guidance still has legal weight. You're still almost going to be in a sort of comply or explain scenario with the regulator if you miss your guidance date window. Okay, we'll crack on. One of the things I just wanted to do before we started getting into the what's of dashboard connection is sort of bust a couple of myths, I think. Even yesterday, we had a meeting with quite a large company CEO. I should say the company is large, not the CEO. And even yesterday, his view was that he was not going to turn on the efforts to get ready, because he still wasn't convinced this whole thing was going ahead. I'm hoping that sort of attitude is in the really, really small minorities now, because everything is all systems go now for this. And I've also spoken to some pension schemes who just say, well, no one else is getting ready yet. I'm not sure I'm going to prioritise it. And I get that none of us have got people sitting on a bench drinking cups of tea waiting for stuff to do in pensions. We've always got something on. But I think having the attitude that no one's getting on is just wrong. So I thought I'd bring you some stats. So just to sort of go through where we're up to at the minute. So we are obviously pension software providers. I'm sure a lot of you on this call are our customers already. But we also provide something called an ISP, which is an interconnectivity service provider, the sort of plumbing between pension schemes and the central digital architecture the dashboards will run on. So we're at a point at this time where if you look on the number of members we'll be servicing, we're already at nearly 4 million members represented by clients who have chosen us as their ISP. And of that nearly 4 million, there are already connection projects underway for schemes and providers representing 2.4 million of those. So those are people already testing how they get data to us, how they connect, all that sort of thing. They're a long way down the line. And then in between, we've got this number that's just crept over 3 million this month of data readiness assessments. So that's schemes and providers who have asked us to run the rule over their data, just to give them an indication of where they need to apply their focus to get their data ready. And I thought it would be also useful, so not only just to bring that to light, so if anyone is still sitting there thinking nobody has started, well, you're about 3 million out on that assumption. But looking at that 3 million, what is interesting is what are the results we're actually getting. So having looked at 3.2 million records, I picked these fields. We're going to talk about matching in a minute. But briefly, matching data is the fact that when a human goes to a dashboard, the architecture within the dashboard will send out a search, and it will say, to everywhere where there's pensions, do you know David Rich? And this set of data, along with some other fields like email addresses and home address and all that sort of thing, previous surnames, there's quite a lot more data, but looking at these key 6 fields, you're going to get that as a pellet of data that you then have to look inside your own data systems and say, do I know this David Rich? I've got a David Rich, is it the same one? That's the matching part of the process. And when we actually looked at the data readiness assessments, this yellow line shows us the difference. On the left-hand side, these are percentages. So somewhere just, well, as we can see, thankfully, across our client base, very few problems with invalid NINOs. Small numbers of dates of birth, but even so, small numbers for 3.2 million people is a lot of people. Missing postcodes, getting up towards 2%. But what we actually found was over 8% have an incorrect surname. And much of that will be down to people getting married or divorced or otherwise and not having told their pension scheme. But some of it is simply spelling mistakes. You just hold the surname wrong and always have. So that is slightly comforting across our client base that have gone through this already, and that in the main, those key fields are relatively low. Surname, a bit of a worry, but equally, it's one of those things that's easily fixed using third-party data services. The thing to think about, though, is that averages can be a little bit misleading because that's an average across a very large data set. And our data set, being Heywood, is slightly skewed towards DB schemes that still have active members. So you would expect that data on average to be better than your average deferred member data set. But nonetheless, still evidence that even if you think your TPR score is really high, and for all of these clients, I can assure you their TPR score is really high because all of this data exists. However, more of it than you think is wrong. The slightly worrying statistic, and why you should never believe averages, is actually it really matters as to the range. So what I've projected on here, and the scale does change quite a bit here, is that's the same yellow line showing the average number of errors per scheme. But actually the pink bar shows the worst of each category. So we do have some schemes that have over 40% errors with forenames, more than 70% of middle names. Postcode, at its worst case, is 50. At its best case, is 0. So don't rely on averages for your own analysis. You do need to look at your own data and see where you are, because you will make a lot different decision about your data matching rules if you're down at 0 than you would if any one of those data items is up at 30-40%. So having shared some current stats with you about those clients who have got ready early, you can see that some of them have done a good job by getting early. I've got quite a lot of problems to fix. We're breaking this down now into 4 areas, so we can go through each of those.
So find data. Some of you may be familiar with this type of data under the term of common data. It's the basic personal data that will be used by a dashboard to match a person with their pension. It's to find their pensions. So it's their personal data, name, date of birth, address, national insurance number, and so on. Fairly basic stuff that we've just been talking about. And I think there's a few steps you need to go through with this. And the first one is to actually assess what you actually hold. Where the gaps in the data are. You need to compare it against third-party data sets and assess whether it is correct or not, and where it is either not there or it turns out to be wrong, you need to fix that data. That's a piece of work that you can get lots of help with. There's lots of organisations that can help with that. As Chris mentioned, we've already done that on many millions of member data records. But it's worth also being aware that getting your data clean is not a one-off job. Historically, data cleansing is something people perhaps did once a year or every few years, or maybe not even at all. But with dashboard, you need to keep the data clean and accurate all the time, because once you're on and it's live, it's always live. So you need to assess what you've got, fix what you've got, and then put in place processes that make sure it stays in a good condition.
Thanks, and we'll come on to some of the hows of that in a bit. But we started talking about matching, and why we particularly focused on our data analysis about those data fields that you're going to match on. So it brings into question the other thing that you will be told when you get a search. You'll be told whether that data has been verified before it gets to you. So if we think about the members using dashboards, they will have to prove who they are to the dashboard. You're not doing that at the back end. The dashboard front end is doing that. Once it is established that the person on the dashboard is real and has passed all their security challenges, you will get a set of data to say, do you know David Rich? Here's everything I know about David Rich. But you'll also get little flags against some of the data items that say, and a third-party identity service has verified this. Or the flag will say it hasn't been verified by a third party. It's basically whatever the member typed in. And you should bear in mind that national insurance number is one of those key fields that will not be verified by any third party. It will just be whatever the member typed in. Nobody will have checked it. It will be checked that it's a valid NI number in terms of its pattern and shape, but it might not necessarily be the right NI number. There is no service for that today. So you will need to think about, when you set what you trust, that's to look at your own quality data, and do you trust it? Have you checked that it is right? Not just that your TPR score is good, because that just means you've got something in a data bucket. Is the stuff you hold in that bucket actually right? Is the important thing for matching. You might also not trust different types of data that you get from the dashboard architecture in that search if it's not being verified by a third party. That's for you to choose. There's quite a lot of flexibility in there, but as with all things flexible, that means choice. So you do need to know where you stand with your data before you can start thinking about matching rules. I've been in quite a few meetings where people have said, well, what's everybody else doing? And the honest answer is, everyone else is saying, what is everyone else doing? So hence why PASA and the Dashboard Working Group did set out to start trying to give some guidance about matching rules. The first one was last summer, and we've been updating it ever since. But it doesn't come away with the fact that you must look at your own data. You must know where you stand to decide what you trust in your own data, and then look at the find message to say, which of those bits do I want to match on? And then throughout this is now a process. You're making some decisions now, and you just need to test those and get them into live. But you need to be sure that you can monitor those once you are in live, because you need to know whether those matching rules are working for you. And you'll also need to know, how might I evolve them over time? If I do a big data cleanse in a year's time or 2 years' time, might that mean I revisit my matching rules? That sort of thing. So moving on to the view data. So this is what the members will actually see.
Yeah, so the find data is very important, but equally important, and actually a bit more complicated, is the view data. It's what you're going to show the member once they've passed through the find process. It covers areas like knowing information about who the administrator is, employer information, estimated retirement income, the numbers, what benefits have they got, any accrued benefits, and you'll also need to have some information about where to signpost a member to if they have further inquiries. One of the really complicated ones potentially is about the numbers, the values, the estimated retirement income, accrued benefits, etc. So again, you'll need to assess what your data looks like. You'll need to first look at things like, do you have easy access to the calcs to actually produce these numbers? In some instances, these might not be numbers that you have to produce very often, it's not something you routinely do. So can you even do it? Do you know how to do it? And have you got processes in place for that? You'll need to think about new processes potentially. If you're now having to do something regularly that you don't normally do, you need to find the gaps. You need to do the calculations and fill those gaps. And just as with the find data, once you've got these gaps filled and you've got all the right information, you need, again, to keep that accurate and keep that up to date. Again, once you're on and you're live, you are always live. So not just to find data, which some of you may be a bit more familiar with from the past and cleansing and so on, but you've got to apply the same sort of processes and the same levels of accuracy and availability to the view data as well.
And it already mentions that one of the key themes of the data standard is that it's actually quite flexible. In part, it needed to be, because there are so many variances in pension design across our industry. But also it gives you enough room to actually decide what it is that you need to send. It is common to think that people will send whatever they send in a benefit statement today. And that's broadly where the level of information was always pitched right from the very first legislation. But that was more as a guide to the level of detail. As a hard and fast rule, you must send your benefit statement information. But it probably makes sense to do that, at least until we get a lot of user feedback post the dashboard availability point as to what they really respond to and what they understand. And we're probably still a bit away from that in the programme as to fully knowing what users will like and respond to in bulk. But there are some choices, so it's worth reading the data standards and the usage guide that was published alongside the data standards that shows where you can make your own choices. So you need to decide what you're actually sending. One of the topics that PASA is currently wrestling with to give more guidance, and it's working with bodies such as the LGA and all of the ABC providers, is to work out what happens when you've got this data in two places. So what we loosely call split admin. One of the most common examples of that is where you have a DB pension scheme that has separate ABCs. So there are lots of options within the data standard as to how you respond to that technical challenge. One of which is that the pension scheme sends its data and the ABC provider sends its data independently, and two messages go up to the dashboard with those values. Another option is that the ABC provider could give the scheme the information, perhaps in bulk once a year around benefit statement season, for example. So there are options to think about. So don't just think about what you've got in your own bucket. Think about what else are you responsible for? Because at the end of the day, dashboard responsibilities, the accountability sits with the scheme manager or the trustee, even where that admin might be across multiple suppliers or multiple providers. You're still the one on the hook to make sure it is done. So work out how that's going to be done. That might take more time as well. And again, another common thing is that start testing early. You don't have to have it perfect while you're still testing. So test what you've got, analyze what you've got, see how you can get it to your ISP or however you plan to connect, which we'll go on to. But also be ready to think about, how do I monitor it into live? What happens if you provide some numbers and you end up with 1 million queries? It probably indicates that perhaps there are different numbers you should be doing. And we'll touch upon a few of those things. But knowing how you are going to test and monitor it forever, because as we keep telling you, once you're on, you're always on. So we've mentioned connections a few times. So what do we actually mean by that? So getting ready for dashboards is sort of in, as we've been setting out, there's 2 or 3 steps here. So we separate out find and view data, because if it is wrong, then the things you can do with it are probably slightly different as to how you do that. That's why we split those out. The third step is, how am I actually going to get that information from my pension record keeping system to the dashboard on demand? And that's where connections come in. And for quite a lot of larger providers, there probably is a bit of a conversation about whether you would build your own or buy someone else's. I would probably argue that if you haven't yet made that decision, you're probably a bit too late to build it. We started ours nearly 3 years ago and got ready for the Alpha program, which allowed us to connect, can't do the maths, 19, 20 months ago that we first connected to the central digital architecture. There's quite a lot of work to do that. So consequently, there is a market of commercial ISP providers, that's the interconnectivity service providers, of which we are one, that are working with TPAs, insurers, the ABC providers, and our pension schemes to get them connected to the architecture 24/7 to a really high availability. So again, you need to be engaging with suppliers now. You need to be thinking about how do they connect me, because you're the people who are the regulated entities, not the ISPs, not your TPAs, not even your software providers. It's you that's regulated. So you need to check, as with all things, the supplier you choose, how are they keeping you legal? And again, I cannot stress enough that you test early and test regularly, just to make sure that everything you're doing is working. You don't need to wait until your data is perfect to start testing connections with ISPs. You could do that now, as you've seen from our earlier slides. We're already handling schemes and providers representing 2.4 million members to test the connections. And they haven't finished their data quality checks at all. So you can do those things in parallel. In fact, I would urge you to do them in parallel. But if you are going through a checklist of what do I need to do if I'm building it myself, or what do I need to do if I'm buying it from somebody else, then there are a number of legal and technical standards that they must meet. There's an overarching code of connection, which covers things like service uptimes and availability and how to handle erroring and that sort of thing. There's a whole suite of reporting standards, which is a constant flow of data from the pension scheme or the ISP into the central digital architecture. How do you monitor? This is something you might think about. How do you monitor that reporting is working? How do you find out if there are problems in the reporting before the regulator finds out? That sort of thing. So what is the visibility and transparency of what your service provider is choosing to do for you, that you can remain responsible for making sure that you're monitoring your suppliers? And lastly, this is personal data. So I probably shouldn't have put this last, but personal data, security, disaster recovery. You've got quite high availability targets to hit, 99.5% availability at all times, not just office hours. But also, how can you make sure that data is secure all the time? And lastly, the thing I would also urge you to think about right now. So it's very easy to think of this as another project. As an industry, we've always treated data as projects. There are very few people that have always thought about data as an ongoing thing, although that is increasingly the trend of having data management programs constantly rather than just as and when we need it. But there are some things that will change when dashboards exist. So absolutely fine, assess where you are today, get that ready for your connection date. But while you're doing that, think about what happens next. So the two main areas I'd like to just instill some thoughts in your mind today, and we'll probably do separate webinars to talk about the detail of these. But once you've got your matching processes, once that goes live and once the real people start using dashboards and start typing their data in, some of which will be verified by a third party, some of which will just be whatever they typed in, warts and all, spelling mistakes and all, you're going to get that information through and you're going to run it through the matching rules. And there are three options in your matching rules. You can say, yep, I definitely know David Rich. You can just think, no, I don't, so I'm not responding. But you also got some middle ground to say, it may be Dave Rich. Some of the data doesn't match, but it's close. I can say maybe. I've maybe got something for David. And that's what's called a possible match. Now, a possible match in terms of the member's experience on a dashboard is that they're going to get information presented in front of them that says you've got these three pensions and here's your state pension and you've maybe got these two other pensions. And what they'll get for those you've maybe got pensions with Heywood is they'll just get contact details. And it's up to you what you choose to put as your contact details. But if that's a phone number, then you're going to get a phone call to say, the dashboard says I've maybe got a pension with you. So that's the resolution part of it. How do you resolve that possible match? Time, you'll build up enough evidence of how your matching rules are working that you might tweak some of your matching rules. You might say maybe more often if the data is a bit more uncertain than you thought. You might say maybe less often because you're more confident the data is either going to be yes or no. So these things will change over time. So think about what you want to start with, but also think about how you might evolve. But that could take quite a lot of time. So we have we've modelled this with a couple of our TPA clients, where they think one of these phone calls could be somewhere between 15 to 20 minutes of resolution time of your phone team if someone's been on a dashboard. That's partly the fact that you'll have to go through your own call scripts to identify them and verify them and make sure that it is Dave Rich ringing you. You only go ask them some supplementary questions to check that the Dave Rich you've got in your records is this same person. You're basically doing manual matching on the phone. And then at the point you have decided it is them, you've still got follow-up work to do. So the reason they were a possible match in the first place is probably because you've got some data that's wrong. So you'll have your own processes for whether you take that change over the phone or not. That might trigger another change to say, okay, can you send me your marriage certificate, or can you send me or your latest address, give me some evidence. So there's more processes. It's not just somebody rings up and you answer a question. There's some admin processing involved. And even if it's not them, you won't be changing anyone's data, but you still have to update everything we've done in the ISP. You have to. We send a token to the dashboards every time we do a match. And if it turns out that that possible match is in fact, no, it's not him, then you have to update that. So you need to tell your ISP that that's work that needs doing. So even for a no match, it's still, a good 15 minutes time on a phone call. And that, of course, adds up and costs a lot of money. The chances are, of course, that the vast majority of your possible matches are going to happen quite early on in dashboard's life cycle. Because that's when the data is possibly at its weakest. It's also new to all the members using dashboards, so they might not type in everything that you would like them to. They might get it wrong. So having a different solution for how you resolve possible matches is something we've also been working on to make that an online journey, to not swamp all your phone teams. But even outside of possible matches, which will be an immediate rump of work, life will change. We're into a world now where pensions is almost part of the open finance architecture. Baby steps, but it's heading in that direction. So how might your admin change? We probably have very little engagement in pensions as a general benchmark for pensions, not so much as banking does by comparison. So you need to think about, if everyone can find their pensions online, and for the first time ever, see all their pensions together on one screen, might they ask different questions? So might you need to be ready to answer those questions, because they won't get all those questions through dashboards. One of the challenges Paz has been wrestling with as to what to expect for the user experience is, if we are not sending transfer values today for DB schemes, for example, and yet members will see their DC pot size on a dashboard and won't see it for a DB scheme, might that spike a lot of queries for transfer values? Are your transfer value calcs automated? Have we suddenly shift the demand model that new people are asking you new things that they don't currently ask you today because they're not engaged very much? These are things you need to think about and decide whether you're ready for that. Because when dashboard availability point arrives, so not your staging date is when you've got to get your data ready. But by the dashboard availability point, is my admin ready for what might come next? If you've already got member self-service, do you need to think about what you offer on online self-service? Is there a nice journey that if they found you on a dashboard, you could perhaps give them contact information that actually includes your self-service website to push traffic along and keep them online? So Once they get there, what's in your online presence? Is it still useful if they've already found information on the dashboard? That might change how you work. And a phrase I'm trying to launch into the popular psyche, business as unusual. We don't know what dashboards will bring. If we look at some of the successes across Europe, like Sweden, for example, one of the earliest implementations of dashboards, they've taken a long time to get to where they are today. We're going to catch up with the functionality that's available on the Swedish dashboard almost on day one, not quite, but they've taken 15 years to get to the level of complexity that they've got on their dashboard. If you model their numbers into the UK, given that we are a bigger country with more pension providers, that's about 15 million requests a year going through dashboards. What's that going to change to how you do admin?
I think to just pause for a minute and recap over what we've been talking about. There's some more sort of key messages and points to take away from this. I mean, one of them being that matching rules are going to be really, really important. But you can't really settle on those and start testing them until you've got your data quality into a good condition, because the matching rules are not going to perform in the way that you would expect them to if the underlying data that's being used to match isn't where it should be. As Chris has just said, the pension information, the view data that you're going to be presenting is going to be viewed alongside pension information from other suppliers. So you need to give a lot of thought to what you're presenting and perhaps how you're going to present it. You really need to understand how you're going to connect. So it all comes back to an ISP in most people's situations. And again, this is not a one and done. This is the beginning of a whole new world for us. I like Chris's analogy of sort of open pensions. We're all used to banking being an accessible everyday part of everybody's lives. Well, pensions is now heading in that same direction. And all of these things, the right ISP for you can not only provide the services you need, but also give you the guidance and support and advice that you need. A lot of the ISPs have been involved from the very outset. They've worked very, very closely with the regulators and the people who built the central architecture. So you need to think really carefully about who you partner with on this, and that you get the right help at the right time and in the right order to get you to where you need to be. Do we need to stop and see if there's any questions, John, at this particular point?
Yeah, I've just seen there's a couple in the Q&A panel that I'll pick up. So John Coombs has asked if we're a Heywood client. Thank you, John. Are these considerations taken care of through Altair routines, calcs and benefits, etc.? Yes, is the very simple answer. If you work with your customer relationship managers, they can show you what we've been doing across the calc routines to make sure that those relevant ERI accrued numbers are provided back to dashboards, and that you can generate them in the first place. So best catch up with the detail with your own contacts. Mark Briggs, thank you, Mark, for testing our Q&A panel. The first question we had through: do we do easy boarding tickets? Well, let's just say some of us have been through the connections with the dashboard. I dare say we'll find it easier the second time round. Some people don't know what fun they've got in store yet. But thank you for your question. John M, did we have any more?
Yeah, hi Chris. Just one more from Timothy Jenkins just now. He's asked, do we have control over where potential matches are signposted to? As in, will it just be our contact details or to our website in general, so we can point towards a specific page that contains a form requesting further information, for example?
Absolutely. So within the data standard, there are 4 different communication channels you can provide for every dashboard message. So, for example, you could choose for that to be different for a possible match than it is for a full match. And of those 4 communication channels, one is the website, and you can choose whichever URL you want to send as part of the message on an individual case basis. So we have been working with TPAs who want to send different communication channels dependent on which scheme or even which category of scheme the members are in. And we have quite a few people who are connecting and are choosing to give different contact details for possible matches versus full matches. So that is entirely within your gift to decide how you do that.
Just one final question, Chris, and I'm not sure if there's any information on this. It's around a national framework, and if there's any information yet on that.
I believe the national framework are aiming to put it live on the 22nd of April.
Excellent. That's all for now.
Thank you very much. We'll crack on.
So continuing sort of on the theme of just recapping over what we've talked about a lot of the detail of what you need to do, but in the round, that's how do you get ready to connect. So in summary, you need to get on top of your find data. Having a good TPR score is not the same as knowing that the data you have is accurate. There's lots of providers out there who can give you a data readiness assessment that can help you understand the accuracy of your data rather than traditional TPR scoring, which just tells you whether you've got stuff there or not. There's lots of providers who can actually use trusted third-party data sources to validate and cleanse and enrich and add to your data. On the view data, your ISP providers can generally help you with this and understand the various choices you have. There's a lot of guidance written on this, and many more pages of guidance than there is on find data, because the number of options and permutations to get the right view data are significantly more complicated and need a lot more attention. And you'll needing to keep these calculations up to date and accurate all the time means you need to start looking at how you can apply automation. And again, there's suppliers that can help you with that to stop that from becoming a massive job and something that burns up huge resource by automating it. You need to connect, and brings you back to the ISP, which will be the most common method for all but probably the very largest schemes. And you need to, I like Chris's phrase of business unusual. Today we live in a world which is going to be very different to the world we're about to find ourselves in. What is currently unusual will become the norm, and you need to prepare for a business as usual world of always being on, always being accessible, and always having to be live and accurate. The brave new world of open pensions is here. So there's a lot of things that need to be happening, and there's a lot of help out there to make sure that journey runs smoothly for you.
Thank you. I think the key message we want you to get from all of this is that you aren't alone. You don't have to go through these challenges. Working out how to do that, and more importantly, there's quite a lot of these things you can do, and you don't have to do it manually. There will always be some fringe cases where you might need to go down to your basement and find your original files, but in the main, there are a lot of third-party services out there that can help you do some of this analysis and cleanse automatically. And there are a growing number of suppliers like ourselves. I won't name them, it's my webinar, but there are lots of them. So you do have plenty of choice in the market. But early planning is key, as we've said so many times now. Until you test, until you assess, you don't know what your challenges are going to be individually. So do start that early. We can't all be rushing through the security gate at the end together. People will miss out on their dates. And that might not be a good enough excuse for the regulator that you just didn't start soon enough. So moving on, obviously thanks for all the questions that are still coming in. So please remember to put those through the Q&A. So where we're up to, just to give you a bit more thought on what we are specifically doing at Heywood, to hit all of those particular concern points, is that we're already well into doing data accuracy over, we're nearly at 70 clients now. We've had a few more since I wrote this slide. that have done their initial data accuracy assessment. You know, that's a great first step if you haven't done that already. You know, just how much trouble am I in? Show me what those numbers are. And of those, 11, I think it's 12 now, have actually started on their cleansing journey with us. There might be other clients that may be doing it themselves, but there are, you know, a good chunk of those have done the accuracy assessment and gone, right, how do we fix this? Let's go. We're looking at some clients about the options we have for calculations readiness, and we can do this for non-Heywood clients, not just Heywood clients. In fact, some of the data accuracy reports we've already done aren't for Altair clients. They're for people who use other people's software. So we're quite familiar with all of that. Calculations readiness is another area. We will come across clients who don't, for example, regularly revalue their deferred pensions, which now becomes a requirement under dashboards. So some of those gaps might need filling with standalone calcs. Some you might have time to change the calculation automation within your admin platform, but there are options out there, and we work with a number of clients for various different ways of solving that problem. One of the other challenges for providing that information can be solved manually, and one of the options you do have, if you can't provide the retirement income or the accrued benefit numbers at the point at which the member's on the dashboard, there is some leeway that you can go back to them afterwards. So for DC arrangements, you've got 3 days to produce those numbers and make them available for the next time a member goes back to a dashboard. And for hybrids or DB, you've got 10 days to do that. So you can go away and do that. So you might find that you'll get some fringe cases where you might just say, I don't think the cost justification meets the need to actually automate all of those. There are some fringe cases I might just have to accept that I'll do it manually as and when a member turns up. Of course, you can't control the demand for that, so you don't know whether that's a sensible decision or not. But, you know, it is an option for you to think through, and we can help you with that while you're thinking about your data accuracy and the availability of calc results. And there are quite a few things we've built into our ISP. You know, it was a huge advantage for us to be in from the first day. 2016, we started with the dashboard program, even before it was called that. So we know what we've built has already been through all of the rigor. We'll have to retest it again in the summer when we can reconnect to the central digital architecture. But we recognised for early on, having seen some of the results of that early connectivity, is that you as clients need to be able to check that we are doing our job. So producing the management information and the insights data as to what's going on inside our ISP has been something we've built into our solutions from day one. And the ability to be able to test stuff. I mean, none of what we're talking about today is one and done. That should be another key theme coming through this, is that you might assess your data, but you need to keep assessing it. You need to set your matching rules, but you'll need to be able to assess them and decide when and how you change them. And as more members use it down the line, do we change exactly the numbers we put up on the screen? Are there different numbers we could show that might lower the queries or give more information? And we've also been thinking, as we mentioned earlier, around possible matching, is that, you know, we have been thinking about what the solutions are for what next. What happens when we're in a brave new world that people can see their pension data whenever they want? What does that mean they will then do with you as one of their individual pensions when they want more details? So that's a lot of what we've been doing for the last, well, from day one, to be honest, but we've managed to do a lot more of that in the last year, while the central program has been in a bit of a pause. So we have not rested on our laurels.
So we've referred to guidance and help a lot during this conversation, and just to signpost some of that for you, there is a huge amount of guidance available. If you go to the PDP, the Pension Dashboard Programme website, there's an awful lot on there. There's a huge amount of really, really good guidance on the PASA website. Both Chris and I have been involved, along with many others, in helping produce that guidance and content from PDP and from PASA. It's really comprehensive. It's all regularly reviewed and current. So there is a lot of information out there. And one of your primary sources for help and guidance will will more likely than not be your ISP, because they have been working with the program, and they should have all the knowledge that is required. And of course, you can always ask us if whether you're current clients or not. We're always happy to try and help guide people if that would be of use to them.
Absolutely. So I think some key takeaways and the summary of all of this is, whilst we hopefully we've busted some myths that no one started. There are millions of members that are already being checked. But don't worry too much if you haven't started yet. We can definitely help you catch up. That's not a problem at all. But you really must plan ahead. I think the airport security thing is actually turning out to be a better analogy than I thought when we thought of it. It really gets you into the fact that you're not just going to suddenly get ready and turn it on. There are steps everyone has to do to go through the connection window. So you've got a month to connect. When it's your turn, you are allowed to go early if you want. But lots of people will be in the same month as you, so you really do have to get ahead to make sure that you can get through that. And again, just to reiterate, you haven't got to do this on your own. There's lots of people out there that have been thinking about this sort of stuff. It's almost shameful to admit that we've been working on dashboards for 8 years now. But there's a lot of knowledge that we can impart, and other suppliers in the market have been doing this just as long. And the help and guidance is everywhere. And if you can't find it, just ring us up. We're both on the PASA working group. I'm on the dashboard advisory group advising PDP how to deliver all this. We can always help you. And just as we're just wrapping up, that seems to be strangely timely. It was almost run to the exact plan. John, have we got any more questions? I know I just answered one in the chat because it was a simple yes.
Yeah, that was the final question, Chris. Thanks for answering that. So the question was for everybody else, how will the Heywood product identify gaps in our view data? Will it identify members that don't have a current ADS, for instance? And Chris just confirmed that yes, and it will check the date of the values is still within range. So that was the final question in the chat.
Excellent. A couple of minutes then, if anyone's got any burning questions they want to throw into the mix. While you're thinking about that, then just a little bit of a reminder of what you can do next. If you haven't already started your assessment, you can approach us for that initial assessment. It's still currently free. But of course, the thing with the bottlenecks, if we leave it a bit too late and people start their preparations too late, then I can't promise it will always be free. We'll be doing lots of other work. And if you want to hear more about our ISP service, then by all means, hit the QR code or go to our website. Or if you're a Heywood client already, give your CRM a call or me. Any more questions, Sean?
Nothing yet. So I think we could probably wrap up, Chris.
Lovely. Thanks for joining us. I know everyone's been advertising a lot of webinars on this subject. So we're very glad you chose to come to ours. We'll probably do a few more on the more detailed aspects. So rather than just give you this sort of very gentle skim across all of the main 4 topics, then we'll probably do some more detailed masterclasses on each of those. But just by way of summary, what we've talked today is about the timescales. We've talked about assessing your find data, which is the information you will receive from dashboards to say, do you know David Rich? We've talked about getting ready to make sure you've got the right answers to give back, which we call the view data. And there are lots of choices as to how you do that. So worth getting your analysis in early and choosing what you send back. We've talked about the connection itself and how you can work on that in parallel to all of your data readiness activity. And in fact, I would urge you to do it in parallel. There's not a lot of time left. And then lastly, still do think about what happens next. I don't want us, any of us, and partly why we put a start line on this last slide. That sort of connectivity date is your start line. It's not really the finish line. It might be the finish line for making sure you hit your legal duty of connecting. But what that really means is that that's the starting pistol for the world of open pensions, and where your pension always exists online somewhere alongside everyone else's pensions, and that is bound to change the demand model for our services as pension experts. So thank you very much for listening. If you've got any more burning questions that occur to you afterwards, then please send that through to us and we'll get some written answers out to you. Otherwise, have a very pleasant rest of your day.